So greetings to all of you who are out there, I'm not sure in YouTube land or in Zoom land, and also especially to Roshi Joan, who I imagine might be watching up in your retreat. Hi, it's great to be here. So my talk today, uh, I want to try to explore with you uh, what might be an appropriate response to our times. And this is touched off by a koan, which is a public record of a dialogue between a teacher and a student. And this is case 14 in the Blue Cliff record. And a monk asked Zen master Uman, "What's the teaching of a Buddha's whole lifetime?" And Uman replied, "An appropriate response." It's a great answer, I think. So Master Uman, or Yunmen in Chinese, who is a crafty devil, and he was the master of what were called live words, words that could bring his students awake in just the exchange, in just that verbal exchange, more effectively than whacking them with a stick or slapping them, just laying these words on them. And because of the life of his words, he's one of the most quoted Zen teachers of the Tang Dynasty. I like the story of his last teaching, just to give you a little flavor. When he was in his 80s, Uman composed a farewell letter to the king, and he called for his students to set up for a lecture. And a lecture much in the form like we're having here today, except there was no video. And so he gave this final lecture, and his last statement was, "Coming and going is continuous. I must be on my way. Coming and going is continuous. I must be on my way." So then he put himself into lotus position, and he died. And his preserved corpse was mummified and venerated for 1,000 years until it disappeared sometime during the Cultural Revolution. So that's a little flavor of him. As I said, he was a crafty devil. So there are a number of different versions of Uman's turning words in this case, an appropriate response. I really like the translation that comes in an unpublished lecture by my teacher's teacher, Shunryu Suzuki Roshi. It's an unpublished lecture from 1963, I believe. And his translation's a little different. It says, "The teaching confronts each." The teaching confronts each. So Suzuki Roshi said, the teaching given by Shakyamuni Buddha during his lifetime was accommodated to each disciple's particular temperament and to each occasion's particular circumstances. For each case, there should be a special remedy. According to the circumstances, there should even be teaching other than the teachings which were told by the Buddha. And he asks, in this light, How is it possible to interpret and pass down an essential teaching which can be applied to every possible occasion and every individual temperament? Basically, there can't be. So he said there should be teaching other than the teachings which were told by Buddha. And that is, the teaching confronts each. The teaching meets each of us in the way that we need to hear it in order to wake up. So this word appropriate or appropriate, as a verb, it means to make one's own, to take exclusive possession of something. As an adjective, it means something especially suitable or compatible or fitting. So for me, this is, in a sense, the heart of practice. To make it one's own and to make it fitting. To own one's thoughts and one's words and one's action. And to aim them towards the liberation of all beings. This is the Bodhisattva vow that we will chant at the end of this lecture. And we chant at the end of every Dharma talk. And we chant it every night. But what is an appropriate response? From my perspective, an appropriate response is a completion of the set of practices that many of you know as the 3 tenets. And this is perhaps a modern version of the old teachings. It was developed by Zen Master Bernie Glassman and his students like Roshi Joan. And I know that many of you know them, but for the sake of belaboring the obvious, I'll just lay them out simply and recognize they merit lectures and discussions on their own. The 3 tenets are not knowing, bearing witness, and my version of the 3rd tenet is an appropriate response. This is what flows from not knowing and bearing witness. There have been a number of different iterations of the 3rd tenet. Loving action, compassionate action. But I really like appropriate response. So that's what I use. That's my version in this teaching that's still evolving. So in the last few months, the actions of the government, of the police forces, of citizens who are violent, have sensitized us once again to the ongoing reality of white supremacy in this nation, a reality that reaches back to our earliest days as a nation, and as a nation that was dependent upon the forced enslavement of African peoples who were stolen from their lands and carried across the ocean. And on the lands, the violent removal of North America's indigenous peoples from their ancient lands, from the lands themselves. The promises, including laws and constitutional amendments that were made to these peoples, are broken daily and have been since the day that they were made. treaties and territories that from the start fenced in native peoples have never been honored. Their lands have been encircled, narrowed, and environmentally despoiled. So returning to that word appropriate, we live in a time when the lands, the rights, the privileges, and the wealth that has been created by all, that has been appropriated by the few. And clearly, this is not what Yunmen had in mind. So as I go on with this talk, it comes to mind is we have a new YouTube channel at Berkeley Zen Center, and we've begun posting videos of our Saturday talks, the ones we've recorded since we created our digital Zendo, our virtual Zendo. So 2 months ago, shortly after the murder of George Floyd, I gave a talk that was entitled "Everything is Burning." And after posting that, the first comment that I received about this talk in YouTube said, "This isn't Buddhism. This is political activism. Please stick to the Dharma." So I do not dismiss this out of hand. I promise the anonymous poster that I will think about it, and I've been thinking about it. At the same time, this is a message that I've been hearing for 30 years. Really, from the first day that I began working at Buddhist Peace Fellowship in 1991. That the Dharma is not about politics. That these are worlds apart. From my perspective, what is being characterized as political activism, and thereby as dualistic and deluded, is the fulfillment of the Bodhisattva's vow. That vow not to turn away from suffering. And in that vow, in the spirit of liberation, we see each being as equal in human value. We see clearly, as we sweep away the veils and the filters that are in front of our eyes, we see in a way that is free from deeply imprinted views and prejudices. And these views and prejudices are often planted so firmly in me that I don't always see them. That I'm capable of doing harm and then notice what's going on. But my vow is to do better, to see more clearly and more quickly. I would not be surprised that some of you listening and watching may also harbor the concern that I am veering away from the Buddha's teaching. And I will confess that since I fall far short of Buddhahood, you may be right. Some of you may choose to leave. That's fine. Those of you who stay I invite you in emails or calls or whatever, please contact me. I invite you to hold my feet to the fire. But in this time of pandemic, of fear, of environmental threat, of memory that includes Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and of watching the process of democracy in slow collapse or rapid collapse. In light of those things, I expect I'm going to continue to raise these questions and to address them in what I understand to be the spirit of Buddha Dharma. And that's a spirit, that's an action that, in very personal ways, I feel has already saved my life. And it can offer that to others. These are not modern distortions of Buddhism. Their roots of law, in equality, in non-discrimination, and peace are seen in the earliest Buddhist teachings. If you want, I can literally cite chapter and verse. We can talk about the Vasetta Sutta. We can talk about the Agana Sutta in the Pali Suttas. We can talk about the duties of the ruler in the Chakravarti Sutta. We can talk about Emperor Ashoka's rock edicts. We can talk about teachings of our Zen ancestor Eihei Dogen. There's precedent for all of this. There's precedent for a view of society that is composed of each of us as we work for liberation individually and collectively. So life blooms and fades. An appropriate response meets each stage of life with wisdom and with compassion. Those who are truly awake and trained, and by that I don't mean just Buddhists, bring that response even to their last days. I want to say something, just say something about this word training. We often talk about our Zen training. But we are trained in life. Everything that happens to us is part of our training. And that can be an enlightened training, or it can be diluted training. And how we respond to the world doesn't depend upon an idea. It depends upon our training. It depends upon how we have learned to respond and how we have unlearned to respond in certain ways and chosen other ways. So I think about the first civil rights workers who went to integrate lunch counters and on what were called freedom rides, which were basically incredibly dangerous and risky interstate bus trips where particularly African American youth were crossing state lines, and they were integrating these bus lines. And before they did that, they went for several weeks of training. They went to train in nonviolence. And that training was incredibly powerful and effective. I mean, I think that a lot of it, at the core of it, there was role play. And if any of you have done role play, you know how surprisingly easy it is to slip into the role that you're encouraged to play. And so when they did role play, not only were they the civil rights workers who were beset by violence, but they were also the racists who were raining down blows on them. And they could see how powerful that was. They could see where the well springs of rage and fear were, even in themselves. One of those young civil rights workers who was a freedom rider was Congressman John Lewis, who died on July 17th. Last week, a few days after his death, a posthumous essay of his was published, something that he left as a kind of legacy for us to reflect on. And at the heart of this essay, he writes the following. Excuse me just a second. He writes, like so many young people today, I was searching for a way out, or some might say a way in. And then I heard the voice of Dr. Martin Luther King on an old radio. He was talking about the philosophy and discipline of nonviolence. He said, we are all complicit when we tolerate injustice. He said it is not enough to say it'll get better by and by. He said each of us has a moral obligation to stand up, and speak out. When you see something that is not right, you must say something. You must do something. Democracy is not a state. And I would say the same thing is true in our Zen practice. Enlightenment is not a state. For both of them, I think that John Lewis nailed it. Whether it's democracy or enlightenment, he says, it is an act. And each generation must do its part to help build what we call the beloved community. A nation and world society at peace with itself. So John Lewis's words bring to mind something that Thich Nhat Hanh wrote in a book, again about 30 years ago. The book was called, or is called, it's in print, Peace is Every Step. And he described his practice in Vietnam. He says, when I was in Vietnam, so many of our villages were being bombed. Along with my monastic brothers and sisters, I had to decide what to do. Should we continue to practice in our monasteries, or should we leave the meditation halls? Should we leave the meditation halls in order to help people who are suffering under the bombs? After careful reflection, we decided to do both. To go out and help people, and to do so in mindfulness. We called it engaged Buddhism. And then he says, mindfulness must be engaged. Once there is seeing, there must be acting. Otherwise, what is the use of seeing? I love that. Once there is seeing, there must be acting. Otherwise, what is the use of seeing? We must be aware of the real problems of the world. Then, with mindfulness, we will know what to do and what not to do to be of help. In other words, to enter that situation not knowing, to bear witness, which means to become aware of the real problems of the world. And then we will know what to do and what not to do. In other words, we will find an appropriate response. So back to John Lewis. John Lewis continues and says, ordinary people with extraordinary vision can redeem the soul of America by getting in what I call good trouble, necessary trouble. Voting and participating in democratic process are key. The vote is the most powerful nonviolent change agent you have in a democratic society. You must use it because it is not guaranteed. You can lose it. So please excuse me if I step up on a soapbox for a moment. This afternoon, we are 80-something days away from the 2020 election. Perhaps the most important election in our or our children's lifetime. My soapbox tonight is the vote itself. That this vote is an appropriate response. Voting is not the only thing that we can do. It's not the only response, the appropriate response. It goes hand in hand with other kinds of acting and speaking. But as John Lewis writes, it's the most powerful nonviolent change agent you can have in a democratic society. You must use it because it is not guaranteed. You can lose it. Many people have lost it. Many people to whom it has been promised have not had it for generations. And I would say for myself, there have been times when I didn't really think that voting was going to make a difference. And this is not one of those times. I feel that from this Dharma seat, my responsibility is to recognize all beings, irrespective of their views and beliefs. So I'm not going to talk about who to vote for here. Although if you send me an email later or you talk to me, I will be happy to share that information. I'll be glad to share my political views. They're not a secret, but I don't think they're necessarily appropriate for this moment in this place. But I want to say that some of us are actively engaging with the electoral system. And of course, you are welcome to argue with me. Trading views this way, sharing experience, that's how we learn. And I would say we also learn from working together. Those of us who've been working on the election have been working together, and a new form of community arises in that context. I've been working particularly with other people who identify as Buddhists, and so we've created forums by which we meditate, and we chant, and then in this election cycle, we do letter writing. In previous election cycles, we would spend the afternoon walking precincts. I was talking to someone earlier today that walking those precincts in places that were not entirely familiar to us was very interesting and not always easy, because going from house to house, if there was someone home at that house, you might encounter someone friendly, you might encounter someone unfriendly, you might encounter someone neutral or undecided, and you never knew what you were going to meet at the door. And so from house to house, as I would walk, and as we trained ourselves, this was our training, we would do walking meditation. So we would go to the streets and walk with mindfulness, as Thich Nhat Hanh says. And I would carry the thought in my mind as I was walking. I would feel my feet on the earth, on the street, on the lawn. And I would remind myself that in the encounter I was about to have, any kind of opinion, anything could happen. And so I would prepare myself, not steel myself to argue for a view, but prepare myself to be open, prepare myself to listen, not to argue, and prepare myself to be receptive. Because I believe that people wish to be heard. They don't necessarily wish to be preached to or proselytized. They want to be heard. And if you meet them with respect, you're much more likely to get a response of respect and thoughtfulness in return. So in closing, I return to Thich Nhat Hanh's words. Mindfulness must be engaged. Once there is seeing, there must be acting. Otherwise, what's the use of seeing? So mindfulness is an appropriate response. Sit down. Look inside yourself. And then turn your eyes outward to look at your family, your neighbors, your nation. And consider, what is it that I am seeing? And recognize that seeing itself is an appropriate response. And acting on what we see and think for the benefit of all beings is an appropriate response. I think this is the lesson of the Buddha's lifetime of teaching. This is how we bring our practice into the world, and how our meditation, how our Zazen can pervade the universe. So thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you in person, and maybe I will write my email here in the chat. I don't know if people can see that, but Noah can share it if you would.
They can't see this chat, but I'll put it in the YouTube chat so everyone watching on YouTube will be able to see it.
Okay, but I better spell my name right? Okay. Yeah. I cannot chat with Kigaku. Okay. Anyway, I'm happy to hear from you. I'm happy to talk with you. And may we all be well in these very, very strange days. Take good care.